Welcome to the Franchise Frontier, the podcast where we explore the evolving franchise landscape, dive into latest industry trends, and share actionable tools and tactics to help you build and grow your business.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Franchise Frontier podcast, where we explore business ownership, the realities behind entrepreneurship, and lessons from people actually building a business every day. Today, I'm joined by Russ. Drew is new to owning a business and will provide an amazing look into the space of business. Drew is the owner of Stand Strong Fencing of Charlotte. Today, we're going to unpack the journey, the wins, the challenges, the misconceptions, and lessons every future owner should hear. So, Drew, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dave. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So when you think about looking back, right, I know you've done a lot of things and moved a lot of places. What kind of inspired you to take that leap and become a business owner?
A couple of things. Yeah. I have lived quite a few different places, worked in a couple of different industries, and I had reached that point in my life, both on a personal side, but also a professional side, where I really wanted to invest in myself. I spent a decade investing in other businesses and another decade sort of building up a larger international business as part of a very large team, and really wanted to put that capital, that time, and that sweat equity into myself and my family. And then on the personal side, I started this business, was really inspired to get into managing my own business by my kids, really. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. When I started the journey of identifying and then executing on starting my own business or getting involved with Stand Strong Fencing, they were little babies, and I really wanted them to see my relationship with business and work in a different light, and sort of be part of growing up with someone who's building a business and being hopefully inspired by that. So hopefully that gives you a sense of kind of how I made my decision.
Yeah, very cool. And, is there something that led you to maybe not necessarily Stand Strong Fencing, but the home service industry or something to that extent?
Yeah, I think part of my journey when I kind of made the decision, I'm someone who is going to give their all to anything that they're doing. And so, I spent 10 years at Amazon with AWS, and that's the type of place, the culture of that organization, where it'll take everything to give it. And so I knew that I would never take the leap to actually start my own venture if I didn't step away from that. So I actually stepped away from that as the initial exploration of kind of, well, what am I going to do now? I spent a lot of time kind of walking down blind alleys, as I say, and figuring out what I really enjoyed doing. Not necessarily just hobbies, but things that really intrigued me, that possibly were novel. And the trades, really building and working with my hands, was something that really intrigued me. And I got very into woodworking, metalworking, carpentry. We owned a home for the first time. We had lived in big cities, living in apartments and flats. So I got very involved in sort of understanding what needed to be done, around the house. And that really grew into an understanding that there was opportunities in the trades, in home services. And I really developed kind of a 3-point set of criteria on what I was looking for. The market I'm in, Charlotte, is a very popular market for franchises. So it's difficult to find sort of a new territory versus acquiring an existing entity. And fortunately for me, Stand Strong Fencing fell into that category after probably about a year of looking. And by that time, I was pretty ready to pull the trigger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an incredible perspective in terms of how long. Sometimes it's quicker than that, sometimes it's not. But I think you had to do a little self exploration as well to figure out the best way to do that. And so, looking back on maybe your childhood or something to that extent, did you always kind of have that entrepreneurial itch, or was there somebody else in your family that kind of did that, or was this kind of a new thing?
It's a really good question, because just recently I was talking about this with a friend who is exploring the idea of doing their own thing. Works for a commercial real estate business or company here in Charlotte, and the reality is actually when I was younger, I talked about being an entrepreneur all the time. I think I'd forgotten that, I'd gotten the flow of life had kind of I got caught up in that and was just kind of moving from one thing to the next and kind of forgot that actually I had a deep rooted interest in that. I do not have anyone in my family that is entrepreneurial. Well, they might be entrepreneurial, but they haven't acted on it. And so I wasn't inspired by, my father or mother or brother, sort of walking this path. But when I was a child, I remember it. Talking about it quite a bit. And so I got back in touch with that a little bit and then married that with my, 18, 20 years experience working with, quote unquote startups, technology startups, early stage companies, being surrounded by that, kind of founder ethos. And I really wanted to go a slightly different direction, what I kind of call like old school, like entrepreneur, like, a real business that sells real products to real people, solves real problems. So I was always surrounded by that, but I was able to kind of marry that, early interest in it, kind of rediscover that, combine that with this interest in skills and working with my hands, and then take the knowledge that I'd amassed from the, 18, 20 years and say, yeah, I think I can bet on myself and I'm going to do this.
Yeah, you make a great point. I think that sometimes when we're younger, obviously we think that everybody's a business owner. We don't know that the guy at McDonald's is a franchise or whatever that might be. And so it's always interesting to where life starts lifing, right? All of a sudden you're like, well, everybody has a job, so maybe this isn't a thing that I knew about. Or you get out of college and like life gets in the way. But it's interesting that, there is a part of it you remember where you doubled back on it and you're like, you know what, this is something I really want to do. So to touch on that, when you were working at Amazon for all those years and doing that, was there a moment per se that you knew you wanted, like, listen, I'm ready. I need to take control of what I need to do?
I wish I could say that there was like an aha eureka moment. It wasn't that. I think it was a confluence of factors all kind of landing at the same time. And again, I was at Amazon for a decade, which is a pretty long time, at Amazon in particular. And so it was a combination of things changing in my life, settling down in Charlotte, no longer, being on the move, constantly hopping on planes every week, flying from city to city, having kids, right? That'll ground you real quick. And, that forced a change in my perspective on kind of what truly matters to me. What are my priorities? How do I want to live this phase of my life? What are the intentional things I want to do? Can I do those things? Do I have the resources, the experience, the confidence to do those things? And, at some point, it did obviously come to a moment, and it was really kind of my 10 years. I honestly said, that's a nice round number, probably time to step away.
And so that being said, do you think that there was a portion of that also came when, like you said, you'd started to build a family, you guys had moved, you guys had settled? Is this a conversation where, you're talking with the wife over dinner and you're like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this? Because I think that any time that anybody gets into business ownership, whether it feels like a individual quest, it all the families involved in it, right? Whether positive, negative, whatever. And so like you need to have that person that's like, yeah, I think you can do it.
Well, 100%. I mean, without the partnership in my life, and she's very successful herself professionally, and she's kind of the beta to the alpha on my end in terms of us being in a position to sort of say, hey, I'm going to step away and kind of bet on us and see if I can build something that is, a multiple of what we could achieve from a W-2 standpoint, and able to do that, right? And there's a lot of logistical aspects to that de-risk that a little bit, right? And so, my ego would love me to say like, nope, I just did it myself, no safety net, nothing. But no, it was a as well thought through as taking that step can be, because you never know until you take it. So definitely that. And then, for me though, it was less about, hey, I don't like my job and I want to do something different. It was, I want to create a culture. I think there's an opportunity for us to create a culture in our family that I didn't have growing up. I had a lot of great things, but this specific thing wasn't one of them, around entrepreneurship, around, sort of having it, being intentional and taking ownership of the good, the bad, and the in between of your life when it comes to, creating wealth, creating financial freedom, that sort of stuff. And, I think it boils down to, I'm very intentional, for example, with when I talk to my kids. I don't say I'm going to work or I have work stuff. I say I have business to do. Right. And so the idea being that it's not a chore, it's a pillar of our life, and you can find harmony in that. And so getting the buy-in from my wife that sounded pretty cool. She was supportive of that, was a big deal for sure. And whether we get to this or not, but obviously the early days in particular, there was a lot of conversations of like, hey, I'm going to be up early, out late, working weekends, and you got to manage that, right? Even if somebody says, hey, that's cool, sometimes it's not cool, and you got to
Yeah.
figure out how to manage that.
Yeah. I always say, I joke around with my wife all the time. It's never a problem until it's a problem.
Yeah, for sure. Like it sounds great in theory,
Yeah.
So balancing that is part of it. But again, it's all part of the harmony of finding, kind of the happiness and contentness in that balance.
Yeah. And so once you decided to pull the trigger, and even it was with Stand Strong Fencing, like talk about that feeling. Was it exciting, terrifying? What did friends and family think when you made the jump?
Yeah. I think it was thrilling. It's probably the way. I think, there's a both a great unburdening of kind of untethering yourself from the machine of the job, and kind of the career path, quote unquote. For me, there was a great feeling of like kind of freedom, but the nature abhors a vacuum. So with that freedom comes like I got to actually do this now and get out and get it done. And so sure, I would be lying if I didn't tell you there were times where I, had moments of, was this the right move? Was this the right decision? But those were fleeting thoughts because I was pretty bought in. And certainly other folks, I could tell, would come and go, wow, that's really cool. But in a very kind of like, what are you doing type of way, Like it was kind of what you were supposed to say in that regard, which actually I loved. That was kind of fuel for me. I was like, and I talk about it with my team all the time. I'm like, I love stacked odds. I love, the idea of all the people who kind of gave you lip service early on, 5 years from now being like, oh yeah, never had a doubt they were gonna be successful. Like I love that, and I can't wait for it. I won't rub anybody's face in it, but I also will secretly enjoy that accomplishment. So, people are skeptical, and mostly because people are still tethered to that career and job, which is not a bad thing. It's great for a lot of people. It just wasn't for me anymore.
Yeah. The amount of people that are somewhat fearful of doing what you did, I think that's the differentiator between business owners and regular people. I joke around about this a lot, and somebody brought this up on a podcast, and it just rings in my ears. When you think about lions or animals, right? Like some people are built for the zoo and some people are built to be in the wild. And they can be the same type of animal, but there's a difference in hunting for your food and those type of things and having it delivered to you. And I think when you talk about business ownership, there are probably more acquaintances than will ever tell you that wish they could do that, but they just cannot get past that fear.
Totally. And I mean, I can quantify it, to a great extent for you just, from my experience here in my local community, whether it's through church or our kids' schools or, just other communities that I'm a part of that, friends that have kind of seen or acquaintances that have kind of seen me take this step. Just to go back to your analogy real quick, I think it's a great one. And I think, most of us are born in the zoo too, right? And so that's what makes it even more terrifying. It's like one thing if you like came from the wild and then you're pent up for a little while and then you want to break back out. When you're born there, it's really scary. It can be really scary out there. And, I think fear for, rightly or wrongly is the number one motivator of good things and bad things in the world. People operate from a standpoint of fear. And, I, through a variety of things, both related to taking this step, but also on a personal side, was able to go through some thinking and some reorganizing and reprioritizing where I kind of just decided I wasn't going to operate from a standpoint of fear. A lot easier said than done, by the way, right? So I'm not saying it's just a decision you make and it's all good. But if you're going to operate from fear, it's like, you're right. Zoo's probably it's probably the right place. And what I say all the time, because I have people, friends from church, friends from, other dads at schools. I was just introduced literally this morning. My daughter's TK teacher, her son just graduated from a Harvard MBA and is in Charlotte and has started like a search fund to buy a business and wants to talk about, kind of the stuff I did coming from Amazon to this. And people are like, "How'd you do it?" And I'm like, "Well, I haven't really done anything yet. Let's be clear. You know, I just took the step, right? I took the leap and stepped out. 2 years plus in now, I feel a little bit more comfortable saying, yeah, this has been a successful transition. We're really doing it. But particularly early on, it was like, well, I'll report back. This could have been a really bad decision. But I also knew deep down that even if I wasn't quote unquote successful, I was never going back to the zoo, right? I would figure something else out.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point too, where it's, the gauge on success also changes day to day. Things that you guys are doing now, maybe a year ago you didn't think you would get to now, and you thought it'd be further down the road, or things you got to faster, or whatever that might be. That measuring stick is always evolving as far as being a business owner.
Yeah, and I think you just got to be comfortable being uncomfortable as a business owner. And because people have asked me that, right? Like, what's the one thing you would say, that helps? I don't want to say separates you. That's not a better or worse thing. It's just to your point, kind of like what makes you different. It's like just being comfortable being uncomfortable. Because no matter what, you're with every success, you're creating a new problem slash opportunity, right? So every phase you get to, it's like, great, I've unlocked a whole new horizon of opportunity. I need to go out and either I get comfortable and just stay where I'm at, or I just keep going towards the next mountain. And if you thrive on that kind of constantly being uncomfortable but sort of loving it, I think it's a big part of the mindset that makes people successful.
You have to be okay, and you have to find a way to have calm nerves in the face of chaos, right? Business ownership is chaos for sure.
100%. And I mean, we can even talk about that a little bit of systems versus chaos and what can you control versus what you can't control. And I say it to my GM less these days. He says it to me now a little bit more too, but it's all going to be okay. That's the reality. It's like, hey, let's take a step back. Like, it's all going to be okay. What's the move here? Let's think about it and let's make a move. There's no right answer. There's no perfect script. This is the fun. This is the game. Let's either you enjoy playing it or it's not for you, right? And so it's not about wins or losses necessarily. It's about, isn't this fun that we get to make the next move and see if our hypothesis comes true?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. When I was a football coach for a bunch of years, we used to talk about, when you talk about win the day or win the whatever, but it's important that the moniker was always like, win stands for what's important now.
Yeah.
Right? You got to think about what's important now. So when you look back at, let's say, your first year, like, walk us through that a little bit, kind of biggest surprises, biggest challenges.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot, but I would boil it down to, in terms of the biggest challenge, was accepting that I needed to really run the business, call it 70-30 for the first year. Like, I needed to earn the right to delegate. Yeah, I kind of joked in my first year with a lot of people that in a 12-month span, I probably ran every style or composition of fence business you could run. I hired a bunch of people. I fired a bunch of people. I kind of went with the skeleton crew. I ran it myself. I did all sorts of things until, I really settled into, a set of systems and mechanisms that would support me, that I kind of had to invent out of necessity to keep the business moving forward, accepted the fact that I was going to need and began to enjoy the need to understand and kind of do every job in the business for a period of time to reach a point where I could actually delegate it and do so in a manner that allowed me to properly shift my altitude from working in the business all the time to on the business, or at least working in another facet of the business that needed attention now. Right. And so I think that was one of the biggest challenges, was kind of, you sign the papers, you get going, you're like, kind of get your I'm a business owner stamp now. And for me, I wanted to build a team and I wanted to do all this stuff. And I think that was a symptom of probably the larger issue or larger challenge, which is, you, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right? So like, there's a tendency for me, certainly, and I think generally in the DNA of business owners who are competitive people and, kind of want to get out there and just crush it, to feel like you're supposed to be crushing it on day one. Right. And the reality is that particularly in a franchise ecosystem, I'll tell you, with leaderboards and this and that, you can get caught up in all that. Right. And so the challenge is taking a step back and saying, no, I'm building a business. This isn't an overnight success. I need to do the things methodically so that I grow exponentially over time, not geometrically overnight.
Yeah, it's definitely a slow and steady wins the race type of scenario. But you touch on a few really good things there in terms of no matter what. I asked you earlier before we started the call if you've been in business before, those type of things, when you mentioned Amazon. I think that your description of finding your altitude is a great one. I always use the plane moniker in terms of like, I have to figure out as a business owner, am I the 50,000 foot person? Am I the 40,000 foot person? You got to figure out where you level off and
Totally.
then build that team around yourself, right? Hire around. In the very beginning, you don't know. And then the second portion of it that you brought up, which is really great, is that a lot of times you have to get a little piece of 10,000, 5,000, 10,000, all of these different levels to really know where you're the most successful and where you bring the most value to the business.
100%. And I mean, for me, it operates at a couple of different levels. I like, from a cultural standpoint of the business I'm building, I came from Amazon, which has an extremely rich culture. It's well known for its culture. It also in that culture, has a lot of fantastic operating principles, for how teams are managed, how people scale things. And so I've been fortunate that I've been able to steal some of those. Back to my earlier point, I kind of wanted to put all of those in place on day one. And that wasn't the right move. And I found that out. And I'm glad I had the experience of doing that because now I am able to implement them. But from a cultural standpoint, I also, I like I said, part of the reason I got into this is, and you can see from the workshop behind me, like I like to build stuff. I like to do things with my hands. I'll share a quick story. Like when I was kind of running the business almost solo, basically, for about a 3 to 5 month period, not too long ago. And I finally had gotten to a point where I felt, okay, it's both necessary and also I'm in the right place from a experience standpoint and understanding of what I need and what I expect in somebody that I'm going to hire to bring in a GM. Right. And, I had in my mind, hey, when this GM comes in, he's going to slot in. Everything's going to be working great. His first week on the job, we had too many jobs and not enough crews, right? Which is like a great problem to have, sort of, right? It's a problem, but it's a good problem to have. And so I threw on a tool belt and me and him, and we went out and put holes in the ground and put posts in the ground. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to scare this guy away. It's like, he's a general manager. He's not a fence builder. But I think it also formed a foundation for, the team that we're now building, which is like, I will throw my tool belt on and get out there if holes need to go in the ground because we said we were going to do it. I'm never above that. No one on the team is ever above that. That said, is that the best use of my time? No, right? There's something wrong if that needs to happen. And we'll figure that out tomorrow. So there's a cultural element of those altitudes, right? There's no altitude. I'm in the trench with everybody if I need to be in there. I expect the same with everybody on my team, no matter what your role says you are or how much you're paid or whatever. The second thing is, I think, one of the things Amazon definitely taught me as I began to manage larger and larger teams there was, you're right. You need the effective use of your time is better spent at certain times at higher altitudes, right? And really, it's about how effective are you at building the systems and mechanisms, holding people accountable, and delegating that authority and keeping expectations and standards really high, right? That becomes more and more of your job. But you also got to kind of nosedive the plane down to 10,000 feet every once in a while and just get in there and see what's going on. And so I think that's what the mode that I'm now in is, kind of that, 25,000 foot, we're probably still climbing a little bit, but I'm still there. I'm looking at the dials, making sure nothing's turning red, getting updates, less frequently as we go along as my GM has more autonomy and feels more comfortable. But occasionally I'm still going to jump into that sales meeting and sit there and ask some questions and be like, so what are we doing here? Why is that? Both to keep people on their toes, but also to keep me in tune with where the business is.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine where you saw Amazon come from and go to in your time being there, right? The rest of us are only looking at it very, very superficially. You have seen it from the interior. I can't imagine what you've seen as far as, where that business went quickly.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And when I joined AWS specifically, I joined in 2012. People still thought Amazon was a book company. AWS is now, the largest cloud platform and has been for, going on almost 20 years now. But yeah, when I joined, Amazon was I was the 49,000 employee at Amazon. When you joined, you had a little ticker next to your badge photo. When I left, it was 2.5 million, right? So when I joined, I thought it was really big. When I left, it was a heck of a lot bigger. AWS itself grew from I think a $3 billion run rate to now it's forecasted to be a $1 trillion run rate business in 2030. So yeah, I mean it was really cool and just an amazing place, an amazing experience that you can't replicate.
Yeah, and I want to double back to, you mentioned something about, when there was a week where, you had a lot of jobs and not a lot of people, which is a bad thing, but a good thing at the same time. I also think that your ability to say, hey, like the culture that we're building is one where I'll get in the trench or whatever we have to do to figure it out, and we'll figure it out later. But in the meantime, no one's above that. I would tell you that is probably one of the best ways to build a team, right? Where everyone knows that everyone's working together and while everyone has their job and everyone has the thing that they're doing, no one's above stepping in and helping to make sure that we get something done efficiently.
Totally. And again, back to the operating from fear, right? It was like, I thought I found the guy, or it turns out I did find the guy, but I was really confident at the time I'd found this guy to come in that I was going to kind of begin to hand off stuff to. And I was terrified that I was going to scare him away by like, oh my God, this guy is not running the great operation. Why is he building fences? He's asking me to do that. And I quickly sort of said, well, if that's the case, if he's scared away by that, then he wasn't the right guy. So, look, this is going to happen. And recently I had a bit of an unlock. I got good feedback from one of our team members on my communication style and some other things, which I find to be gold, right? It's like at the moment I'm defensive. So I want to be like, just the way I do things. If I take a moment and actually listen to it, I'm like, okay, this is gold. Not that I'm going to immediately change my behavior, but okay, this is a signal for me there's something missing in how I'm communicating, what's in my brain versus what other people are hearing. And it was really helpful because what it turned out to be was that everyone was, I would say something or, we'd have a call and I'd make a comment and people were then having side conversations on, I think this is what Drew wants. Let's do it this way because I think Drew wants it. And, I realized that was on me for not making clear. And then I did emphatically. And now I use this in calls where I go, it's not about what I want. It's about what the business needs, right? So the business is the arbiter of truth, right? It will never lie. It will never deceive you. It's not emotional. It's the arbiter of truth. So when you're trying to make a decision, when you're given a task, it's not what is my boss or what is Drew or somebody, what's going to please them. It's what does the business need and what's going to drive the business forward. And if we all have a conversation around that campfire, then everyone's talking the same language, right? People can disagree. And I encourage that with me and say, look, I think this is going to be better for the business. I know it's not what you think or what you want, but here's my argument for why this is going to be better for the business. And so that unlock was really powerful for me in terms of, going from 25 to 30, right? Where I can sort of say, hey, well, forget what I think. What is the business?
Yeah, you bring up another great point in terms of what you say is not always what everybody hears either, right? And
Totally.
understanding that is okay, but again, if the foundation of the business and the foundation of the meeting or anything that we're doing is based on driving the business into the future, then you have unlocked the ability for people to feel as if they can contribute to that conversation because it's not about pleasing you. It's about, hey, Drew, I really think that you are on to something here. However, you might think about it in this regard because I think this is best for, the business.
Absolutely. And it just gives me a great response, and it's natural, right? I did it when I had a boss, in the sense of like, well, what do you want us to do? And now my retort to that is, what is the business? I don't know. I have ideas. I can respond to your question, but I'm a human being. I'm going to change my mind 4 times between now and the end of the day. I'm going to make a decision because I had a really good morning or because I had a really crappy morning or whatever. Right. And so don't rely on me. Don't rely on anybody. Use people's input, but then determine, I think this is going to, what's going to really drive the business forward. And I have conviction in it, and I'm willing to change when the data change.
Yeah. Is there when you think back, is there something that no one tells you about before becoming an owner?
I think a lot of, I think probably a lot of things. I think a lot of things get, boiled into platitudes, and, I think the one thing, I don't know if people didn't tell me this because I honestly, I didn't ask a lot of people, I kind of was like, it's going to be what it's going to be. And I'm just a person who's like, I'm never going to truly know unless I do it, and so I need to just go do it and then figure it out. But I think what people, what maybe I would have been like to be told, or if somebody asked me, is you make of it what what your perspective is, right? And so it can either be chaos and a nightmare. I mean, it'll be chaos. Let me put it another way. It'll be chaos. That can either be a nightmare or that can be something that you wake up every day excited to address, not because you love chaos, but because it's your chaos, and you get to own it and shape it and drive it forward. And when you go to bed at night or when you wake up in the morning, again, you're not operating from that place of how do I do something to please somebody else? You're doing it from what do I need to do today to move the change forward, right? It kind of just, it distills it all down to a more essential framework than I got to get back to that email from my boss because if I don't respond, he's going to think I'm lazy,
Well, it comes back to what you said, how you react to the chaos is going to determine the outcome.
For sure. And, and the goal, and understanding the goal is not to never have chaos, right? Because again, for me, if there's not something going on in the business that's a little chaotic, that means we're comfortable and we're not pushing forward on something, right? Like, I want to celebrate the wins. Like we signed up some production builders, right? And it's like, it's great. Let's celebrate it. It's this, really good long-term revenue stream. Let's have a moment, but let's also figure out, well, what else does this mean? How else can we expand in this relationship? How do we replicate this with the next 3 production builders? What is the playbook for this? Let's go back and review what we did, and let's go set some ambitious goals and hold ourselves accountable to going out and closing 3 more of these, and we'll figure out how to make it happen later. Like if we win them and then our problem is, oh no, fact 2, we have too many jobs, not enough crews. It's like, great, throw on the tool belt, get in there and start digging. And then, come Monday, we'll sit down and say, all right, how do we fix that problem? And if that's, hey, Drew, you got to get up and go sit in some parking lots at suppliers and reach out to some more crews, or my GM's got to do that. Cool. Let's go do it.
Yeah. I mean, I know the answer to this question when it comes to you, just from our conversation we've had thus far. But, a lot of times when people are looking to get into the franchise space, right, the question populates, did you think that ownership would be more passive?
Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't think I didn't want, so I think the thing is I didn't want passive ownership. And so it's hard, I remember early too in some discussions, I can't remember the gentleman, but someone on the development team reached out and kind of asked for feedback on, now that you've been in this for a while, kind of what were some things. And, for me, it was like, I can't imagine being passive, right? I think for better or worse, and there is a worse part to this, I'm just not built that way, right? And so I think that concept, actually that's my GM on the radio right now, but that concept is sort of foreign to me. I'm sure you could get by, being passive if you have, but that is going to involve, there's no system to that, in my opinion. That's going to involve finding someone who you can pay to not be passive and that you can trust and delegate to and hold accountable. And again, if you're not at least in that first year, in the business a whole lot, I'm not saying you have to build a fence or like, jump in and do it yourself. But if you're not in the business, then it's sort of, you don't really know what to hold accountable, right? You don't know the ins and outs of, hey, when, this scenario pops up, what's the solution, And so I think it's imperative that people do that. Now, if your goal is to move to a more passive mode, which is mine as well, I call it scaling, not being passive, because I can't scale myself. I have to build systems and mechanisms to get bigger. Then, I think that's fine. But I think particularly for this franchise, it's the only one I can speak to, but I would generally say home services or the trades. Not only are you going to need to be involved, just the nature of it, particularly in the beginning, but I think you build a lot of credibility as an owner when you aren't like maybe, can't build the very best fence, quote unquote, or et cetera, but you've done it, some technique. I think those are important elements. And I think the successful people, at least from my point of view, are going to be excited about that with a game plan to scale out of that.
Absolutely. Do you need to take that really fast? You want to pause for a quick second?
Yeah, sure. Do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, cool. Hey, John, what's going on?
Have you touched base with the new land?
I sent him a note this morning. I'm waiting to hear back, but I can circle back with you on that so we can get up there this week. Yeah, let me drop you his number, actually, and you should just take that and run with it so I'm not a blocker. So I'll shoot you Bill's number, and then I'll ask you where we're at. How's that sound? All right, thanks, man.
I mean, that's business ownership in a nutshell, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Didn't plan that, I promise.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Maybe I'll leave it in. Who knows? I doubt it, but we'll see.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to get back to, I appreciate your answer on the last. I think it's a really good perspective in looking through that. In that short amount of time when you were still finding your feet or finding your altitude per se, you said there are some things that you struggled with, right? You might have struggled with, I'm not sure if this was the right thing, but how did you mentally push through those things and really get to yourself to where you are today?
It's a really good question. I think I did my very best to remove ego from the equation, which is super hard. And I think just a human being, you always have ego. And also look, I came from 10 years at Amazon. So there was a bit of a chip on my shoulder of, hey, like I can figure this out. I know how to do this. But the great unlock was, I don't know how to do this. You seem to know how to do this. Can you show me how to do this? So that was usually, and I'll give it like a really clear example. Like my instincts, sell a fence, maybe we sold something we haven't done before. It's early, I'm trying to sell fences so I can get photos of fences so I can put them on my spin the flywheel, right? Get reviews. And I don't really 100% know how this is going to work. I would spend initially, I would say, well, I'm the only one here, so I got to figure this out. And I would go to YouTube, great resource, not knocking it, Google stuff. Probably if I was doing it now, I'd ask Claude or ChatGPT or whatever. And it took me a really long time and a bunch of, really helpful people telling me over and over again to realize that I could just go to my supplier and say, hey, this is what I need to do. What should I do? And they'd go, oh, there's a bracket for that. And I'd be like, I don't need to get like a custom fabricate something. They're like, no, here, like it's 32 cents. Yeah. And I still find myself doing that. I'll still get pulled into, I want to figure it all out, but I have gotten a lot better. And I try to instill that of like, hey, go to the people who are incentivized to help you be successful and ask them if they know the answer to this question. So leveraging other people in the ecosystem, your suppliers, your subcontractors, obviously the franchise and your franchise business development coaches, all of those things. And as quickly as possible, don't beat yourself up too much because it's going to take some time. But as quickly as possible, get to the first thought is, I need to figure this out. Quickly get to the second thought winning of like, maybe I should just go ask somebody who's been doing this for 25 years. And they may have a really simple answer. So I think that was probably, at least at a strategic kind of like philosophical level, one of the harder challenges to get through. But now that I'm through it, it feels like it's a tool in my toolkit that I don't know how I kind of survived with that.
Yeah, you bring up another really good point there. As somebody was listening to this podcast, they hear you say sometimes like, I had to go find out, how to do these things, or I'm looking to build some systems and things to help you scale. A person that doesn't know any better would say, well, isn't that why you purchased a franchise? And I think that there are some things, it's important though, that I think that there are systems and processes in place that are provided by the franchisor, but how they work in what you're doing in your business and how those, maybe there's other things that you might need that maybe somebody else doesn't need. Explain how you think about the systems and processes that are in place are there, And then the things that as you build the business, you find, I need to find this for myself because so it fits in my puzzle piece.
Yeah, totally. And I knew nothing about franchises, honestly. When I started down the path, I knew a little bit more when I ended up, signing the franchise agreement with Stand Strong and starting off. But particularly in home services, right? When I thought franchise, I thought, McDonald's or Chick-fil-A or whatever. And again, I've never run one of those. So anything I say in the next sentence or two is pure speculation. But it's kind of like, we send you the ingredients. This is how the store is. This is how you run, right? It's like kind of literally just through. Now, obviously, those folks need to build the team culture. They need to hire people. They need to do all of those things that I'm sure that there's a playbook for that they try to run across for consistency at a Chick-fil-A. But at the end of the day, you still got to make the call on nobody's sending you the people to staff your store, right? That's not part of the equation. Home services, I think, is slightly different, right? Because it's not the secret recipe to the chicken sandwich that you kind of bought into. It is, though, the supplier relationships, best practices, so sort of the compression algorithm for experience, right? Of quickly, and again, the sooner you can buy into that and lean into it versus being the solopreneur, the more value you're going to get from it, of that compression algorithm, where it's like, I don't need to go figure out how to build a wood gate. There's materials on that for best practices. Now, do I maybe go and work with my one of my contractors or my primary one, and we come up with the way we build them based on that foundation? Of course, and that really leads to the next thing, which is whether there's and again, the preface with, I've never operated a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A, so I'm sure there are some differences, but like, whether you're a Chick-fil-A in Omaha or you're a Chick-fil-A in Seattle, Washington, if you're a Chick-fil-A, right, the market dynamics aren't super impactful, I would imagine, right? I mean, I'm sure there is some, but when I operate in Charlotte versus who operates in Dallas, those are two different markets, two different, from everything from the earth that we're putting posts in and how we're doing that, to the expectations around what a fence looks like, to the suppliers that we work with, to the socioeconomic differences, to the competitive nature of the market, right? And one of the things, I didn't do a good enough job on, and I'm kind of glad I did, because it maybe would have made me pause a little bit more, but Charlotte is one of the most competitive fencing markets in the nation, right? It has one of the oldest, if not the oldest, continually operating fence company, founded in like 1909, Allison Fence Company. Their trademark, their kind of gimmicky thing is they used to sell fences by train, right? They used to take trains to go give estimates. That's how long they've been selling fences. And they kind of have like a fence mafia, right? People work there and go start their own little fence business. So that's the competitive dynamic that's unique to Charlotte, right? That's not the same in Des Moines, right? So understanding that competitive nature is something that you can definitely be supported and pull some foundational understandings of, how do I think about competition in the fence market, and what are other franchises or other brands doing versus what we do. But you also have to take ownership of that and say, I need to differentiate my market. And so honestly, if I look at it through that lens, it's kind of the best of both worlds, in my opinion, where I'm a locally owned and operated business at the end of the day, right? I have the backing of a national set of resources that with every passing day become more valuable and more valuable. Suppliers, every office we add, we have more economies of scale buying with our suppliers and negotiating. So we get better pricing. As we continue to, new partnerships are unlocked for us to access that if I was just, Drew and a couple of guys in a truck, I wouldn't have access to. So those things are continually happening. And as we get bigger and better, those get bigger and better. But I'm also given the autonomy and required to have the autonomy to say, hey, in my market, pricing needs to be X. Yeah. Aluminum, I know aluminum's going to move at this price per linear foot. And so that's what I'm going to sell it at. And it's my job to figure out the cost structure beneath that, either negotiating locally with suppliers or going to my franchise and saying, or my franchise, support team, and saying, hey guys, I really need to get the cost on materials down to this. Who are we talking with currently? If I buy in volume, would that help? Those types of conversations. So that in my mind is again, that balance of like, I get to build my own systems that are unique to the Charlotte franchise, but I'm building it on the shoulders of the stuff that was given to me and the stuff that's coming down the pipe, newer and better every single day.
Yeah, that's a great explanation, and I think that you're right. There's the concept of franchising, and we think about McDonald's, Chick-fil-A. You're right. A number a number two used to be a number two, and number seven is two cheeseburgers any way you slice it, and the cheeseburgers hopefully are the same. That's why you're going, right? But in Charlotte, in the fencing business, it's different, right? The hardware is different that people are using, or how they accent those things, and I think you bring up a really good point. Now, diving into a little bit about the business, and you can talk about before and now, like just kind of describe quickly, of a typical day for you, even though we know the word typical is not typical.
Yeah, and I think the good thing is typical is becoming more typical, if that makes sense, which is great. And I think kind of my own personal KPI for like when I'm waking up and I'm trying to figure out exactly where I'm supposed to be, when and why. That's usually a good sign that some of the systems and processes and rhythms we put in place are working. So I'll kind of give you a perspective on, let's call it year one, right? Where I'm still in the business quite a bit. That's kind of full on, from the moment I get up to the moment I kind of shut down. I'm dealing with, customers, dealing with suppliers, tracking orders, down to the smallest of details, right? Of like, where did they drop the pickets off? Did they block someone in their driveway? I put a lot of miles on my truck in that first 6 months, and there were days that sucked for sure, but overall it was great. Like, I loved it. Again, that's why I did this. I did this to be out, have some dirt on my boots and drive around with purpose. And again, as I said earlier, I kind of went through a lot of different personalities as a business. And so, but I'd say, in the early days, it was really, engaging with the customers, ensuring, trying to live in the future as much as possible. So ensuring, hey, tomorrow's or next week's jobs are lined up and ready to go. But then also kind of constantly tending to the evergreen things, right? One good example is we're always hiring our fence construction crews, right? Our contractors and folks that we work with on a regular basis. We're always hiring that, meaning like we're always on the lookout for that because one, it can unlock potentially new products in our catalog that we hadn't built before, but maybe somebody can now and brings that ability. Or, obviously somebody decides to move on and we need to have the folks so that I'm not throwing on the tool belt and jumping into the trench all the time. And so kind of constantly having, an eye on all of that. Fast forward to today, and we have developed what I call a minimum viable rhythm for the week. We have a weekly call with the whole team. It's run by our general manager. It's not run by me. I am still a participant in that call, but just beginning to get to a point as he continues to build his team under him where I won't participate. And that'll be an opportunity for that nosedive altitude where, hey, maybe once a month I'll kind of jump into that call and see what's going on. We have communication down both through FenceFlow as well as through our voice over IP applications that is managed effectively by the team on a day-to-day basis. And so my personal role has really become more escalate to me for things that either need financial approval, unblocking, Drew only has access to X and we need this, and really kind of strategizing, right? And or giving feedback on new hires, onboarding, things like that. So that becomes much more part of my day. And honestly, the thing I have to work at the most, and I talk with John, my general manager, all the time, it's like, I want to be out at job sites. Like I like being out at job sites. I like being out there, seeing it go on the ground, talking with the customer. And I should be from time to time, but that can't be where I operate from 100% of the time, because now I spend more of my time, whereas I spent a lot more working in the job, making, from a project management mindset, I'm now much more in a scale mindset. And so where I spend more of my time is, hey, what's going on? And like, how do we get into the AI overview in Google? How do I dig deep on like AI SEO and use my time to run an experiment that we could then hire someone to do at more scale? What are some production builder relationships where it's not selling, but it's business development? And I can kind of leverage a more executive to executive type conversation where I'm going to add value versus, me going to Mrs. Jen's house to sell her the fence for the new dog. And so I get to operate in those parts of the business, which really is kind of when we talk about kind of operating on the business or working on the business, that's kind of how I view it, where I, spend my time and dive deep.
Yeah, it seems like in that transition that you've got into, you've started to figure out, like you said, where is your time the most valuable and how do you spend it? When you think back, if somebody was watching this thinking about business ownership, what advice would you give somebody, or what should people ask before considering a business?
Yeah, I mean, I think understanding why, what is your motivation? I think that's always important. I don't think it's true that everyone wants to be their own boss. I think it sounds really good to a lot of people, but back to the zoo, wild. And again, that's not a judgment, right? In my opinion, it's not like one is better than the other. I think you're just inherently kind of made for one. But if you're thinking about it, you probably are. There's a higher probability that you're probably built for it. So, and then I think the second thing is really truly understand the commitment and be doing it for a larger reason than purely financial outcome. Again, this was just me, and people can take it or leave it, but it was a lifestyle that I wanted to live, and a culture that I wanted to kind of bring into my family, and I think about that very intentionally. I don't think about it as a job. I think about it as just a component of my life that I enjoy doing. And so, really, and then what you decide to do, I think matters. I'll catch myself saying, hey, it could have been fences, it could have been concrete, it could have been this or that. Selling is selling, that type of thing. And I think that is true, right? I mean, I think at the end of the day, from a high altitude operational standpoint, you have a SKU, you're selling it, you're trying to make the most margin off it, you're trying to do it all as efficiently as possible. That is the game, whatever that SKU, quote unquote, is, right? At the same time, if this was skincare products franchise, I probably wouldn't be as passionate about it. I mean, it's just the reality, right? Like I get to like, potentially buy cool stuff, tools and equipment, and drive around in my truck. That's the lifestyle I want to live. And that kind of goes part and parcel with being in fencing or concrete or whatever it may be. So to me, that's important, right? Like I like to wake up every day and be in that world. So I think that's an important thing that a lot of people overlook. Again, I come from a financial valuation, about, putting valuations on businesses, early stages of their growth. And it's very easy to get tied up in the very important aspects of unit economics, total addressable market, all of those things. But to me, those are kind of baseline things. It's like, yeah, anything I'm going to look at, if I'm potentially going to be an owner, needs to meet those criteria. It's then within that criteria, what's going to keep me going when I realize that, Monday through Friday, it's not me talking about total addressable market and TAM. It's I got to get in the truck, throw all the tool belt, and go build some fences. Is that something I'm willing to do? And so I think marrying those two things is probably something that's overlooked a lot from kind of like the MBA standpoint.
Yeah.
And I think it really matters.
Well, because at some point,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, because at some point, like if the business becomes what it can become, it becomes an identity, and so make sure that identity is something you want to be involved with.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I discovered in that kind of like wandering period that I had post Amazon, pre this, was everything has a subculture, right? Like everything I never thought about fencing once until I got this, and then all I saw was fence everywhere, right? Fence tech. I used to go to AWS reInvent, which is a huge conference. And when I got into fencing, of course, they have a conference called Fence Tech, which is all about everybody in the fencing world gets together one place a year. And it's kind of the same conference. It's just about fence stuff, not cloud computing. And so you're going to spend a lot of time in that world, right? If you're going to be successful, at least in the beginning, for sure. So make it, allow it to be something interesting. It doesn't have to be something that's like you're deeply, deeply passionate about. Because I wasn't deeply passionate about fencing, but I was deeply passionate about the idea of like, I want to get my boots dirty. I want to be outside. I don't want to be behind a screen all the time. I like to be around people who who are capable and build stuff. And fencing checks that box. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah. I did want to double back really fast and let you brag a little bit. You mentioned about some kind of big things, some big contracts that you guys had just pulled off that maybe you're just looking into. Just touch on that for a minute and kind of celebrate it. Let's celebrate it for a second.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I kind of look at it as we have a couple of different businesses within the business. We have our residential direct to consumer business, but I also quickly found in the market that we operate in, given its growth and what's happening, that there was a lot of opportunity to work with production builders. So these are folks like Tri Point Homes or Pulte Homes, and folks who are basically building, starter home communities, generally speaking, townhomes, and working directly with them, either with their land development teams. So they're the ones who are going out. The land acquisition team bought some land. Now they need to get it ready to put 80 units on. And they need 15 acres fenced in, right? Of just standard shadow box, nothing fancy. And then you have their build teams who, not all of them operate this way, but we're like, hey, we're going to have, we have a need for 50 feet of fence on every townhome, and working with them and learning how their business operates and being able to close that. And so recently I'd say for the past 9 months, and this came from a cold email blast that I sent. We have been working with Tri Point Homes. I think we just closed, actually this morning, I just submitted a bid for our 5th development with them in the Charlotte area. And those are, big developments. Those are, the individual fences themselves per unit are, a couple of $1,000, but there's 90 to 150 units per development. And then we've been in the early process of working with a few others, which I won't mention just because it's not public, quote unquote. But we also, in addition to that, through those networks and through the reputation I think we've built, are now in the process of working with some of the larger or largest, home improvement retailers in the Charlotte market, and beginning to onboard with them and become their trusted sort of partner on the fence business. And that's one that's both super exciting. It's kind of like starting the business over again. It's super exciting, but it's also like, we got to really crush it with these folks, which I love. I remember having a conversation with the woman who was kind of doing, the initial assessment. And she kind of was giving me the pitch of like all the reasons we shouldn't do this, kind of thing, like trying to sell us out of it, which is a tactic I'm familiar with. And I just kept smiling because everything she was saying was like, it gave me that feeling of being uncomfortable again. That was super exciting. And so we're excited about that. And, in addition to that, it's a great opportunity from the subsequent conversations we've had with them where I can't help it, but I really want to partner with them and help them not turn around their fence business, but figure out how we can make that portion of their business bigger, better, more profitable. And so I kind of get to put my big company operator hat back on. Honestly, there's no better feeling when I walk in, work with happen with Tri Point and with this other company, walk into a conference room in my boots, coming from a job site. And I feel incredibly comfortable in my own skin and at home, where I'm like, yeah, I know this conference room, I know this Cisco, telecommunications setup and all of this, but I'm there for me and my business and what I represent, and take it or leave it, but that was a really cool feeling and something, that we're going to continue to do more and more of as we go forward.
Yeah, you put your boots on, but found your way back to the boardroom. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, totally. Cowboy boots, like work, not even cowboy boots, like real work boots in the boardroom. That's the dream.
Yeah, absolutely. So that being said, for you, what's next? How do you see yourself scaling? Or you kind of I know you said slow and steady wins the race. So what's next for you?
Yeah, I think slow and steady is a relative term, right? So I think it's the feeling of not, I think as any business owner will say, there's a tendency to be bipolar, right? It's either the greatest day ever, everything's going to be great, or, oh no, everything's going to go to, and so I think it's keeping that middle ground as much as possible of what happens today doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to even remember it a week from now. But I think going forward for us, I mean, look, we have an ambitious vision for what we want to become. And I highly respect and love all of my fellow Stand Strong Fencing franchisors and owners, but we want to be the best Stand Strong Fencing franchise. We want to be we want to be synonymous with fence in the Carolinas. And we want to do that through a variety of ways, both executing the playbook that we've been handed in terms of from the franchisor, modulating and modifying that to our market. But also, one of the things I think that gets me, and I know my team, excited is also helping to invent new ways of doing things and going forward and thinking a little bit outside the box. Because I do think that's a big part of the opportunity in the franchise world, and where I think the small business world and trades are going is you're getting people who are coming from non-trade backgrounds, right? And so the ability, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, but the ability, at least how I view it from my perspective, of saying, hey, can I apply some framework mental model from my past life to this, and sort of figure out, hey, why have we been doing it this way for 30 years or 100 years? Why don't we do it this way? And being the first one to test that and fail a bunch of times, and then find something that works, and get to kind of export that to others as well. So that's the plan. We've also acquired other territories since we started, and we plan to continue to do that as we grow and expand and build a really stable team and a way of operating that we're not reinventing the wheel every time we expand into a new territory. It's simply, here's the playbook, adapt it to this market, this sub-market of ours, and run with it. And, I think that'll be our plan for now until something comes along that makes us go in a different direction or change our tune.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what you said about the difference between home service franchise brands and say like a McDonald's, right? Is I think that one of the things that I know that we do at Horsepower, and especially at Stand Strong, is I think that when you bring people in from other avenues of life, right? People bring a value in terms of with the way they look at something, the way they sell something, the way they install something is different, and it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it, and you're able to that's kind of where Fence Flow even came from, right? In terms of that,
Yeah.
It wasn't just so that's another cool thing. As we wrap up, I like to kind of give you like a 3 and out questions. I go back to football, right? Is there one business tool you can't live without?
One business tool I can't live without. I'm going to say, right now, probably Claude, to be perfectly honest. I want to say Fence Flow, because I probably can't live without that, but Claude's pretty amazing.
Okay. What about the hardest part of business ownership in one word?
Moderation.
Most rewarding part in one word?
Moderation.
I love it. Finally, coffee, tea, or an energy drink?
Coffee and an energy drink.
Okay. And then
Both.
when you do find time to get home, what's your one way to unwind?
Swimming with my kids in the pool.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Drew, thank you. If you're listening and thinking about business ownership, understand it takes work, growth, and commitment, but the upside is real. To our listeners, thanks for joining us on the Franchise Frontier podcast. Playbook is out there. The question is, are you willing to run it? Like and subscribe. Drew, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to watching you in your journey.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it.